She had 15 million reasons to walk away. But love, as Adira Mason would soon discover, doesn't come with a price tag, and neither does humiliation. This is Atlanta. Not the Atlanta you see in glossy magazine spreads or reality TV shows. This is a city of two worlds, existing side by side but never quite touching. On one side, the gleaming towers of Buckhead, where white households hold 46 times the wealth of their black neighbors. On the other, tight-knit communities where survival means looking out for each other, where Sunday dinners are sacred, and where a woman like Adira Mason learned early that strength isn't inherited, it's earned. At 28, Adira had built a life she could be proud of. A successful accounting practice, a modest apartment in southwest Atlanta filled with photographs of family, and the warm crackle of Aretha Franklin on vinyl. Every Sunday, she volunteered at her community center, mentoring young girls who reminded her of herself. Ambitious, resilient, hungry for more. Her single mother had raised her to stand tall, to never apologize for taking up space in a world that often suggested she shouldn't. And Adira had listened. She was respected in her neighborhood, loved by her extended family, and completely unaware that in a matter of months, she would be standing in a mansion full of strangers who measured her worth by the color of her skin and the balance in her bank account. But there was something else. A secret Adira carried like a stone in her pocket. Years ago, her estranged grandfather, a black entrepreneur who'd built an empire when Atlanta's white establishments still refused him service, had left her a $15 million inheritance, tucked away in a trust fund she'd never touched. She told no one, not her mother, not her closest friends, because Adira Mason didn't need rescuing. She'd rescued herself. The sweet Auburn Springfest was everything Adira loved about Atlanta. The air thick with the smell of barbecue and funnel cakes. Children laughing. Street musicians playing brass instruments that echoed off historic buildings where Martin Luther King Jr. once walked. She was volunteering at an arts booth when she first saw him. Tall, slightly awkward in his expensive casual wear that screamed, "I'm trying not to look rich." Hollis Greenberg stood out like a yacht in a swimming pool. He approached her booth with the kind of careful curiosity rich people use when they're slumming it for charity. But then something unexpected happened. When Adira explained the neighborhood's history, the legacy of Black Wall Street, the struggle and triumph woven into every street corner, Hollis didn't offer the usual performative nods. He listened, really listened. And when he admitted he'd grown up in Atlanta but knew nothing about sweet Auburn, Adira laughed. A genuine, unguarded laugh that surprised them both. "You can't really know Atlanta if you only know Buckhead," she challenged him, her eyes bright with amusement and something sharper, intelligence, pride. Hollis smiled. It was a smile that would haunt him in the months to come, the moment before everything changed. "Then teach me," he said. What Adira didn't know was that Hollis Greenberg was heir to billions. What Hollis didn't know was that the beautiful, sharp-tongued woman in front of him was about to teach him far more than Atlanta's history. Their first coffee date turned into 4 hours of conversation that left Hollis's assistant frantically texting him about missed meetings. Their second date was a museum, where Adira explained art history with the passion of someone who'd never had money for formal lessons but had educated herself anyway. By their third date, Hollis showed up at her church's charity dinner, a move that earned him approving nods from Adira's community and horrified phone calls from his mother. "Who is she?" Vivian Greenberg demanded over the phone, her voice dripping with the kind of concern that wasn't concern at all. Hollis ignored her. The weeks blurred into a montage of stolen moments. Walks along the Beltline where they held hands and argued playfully about everything from music to politics. Late nights at Apache Cafe where Adira introduced him to live jazz and he introduced her to the fact that not all white people had rhythm, though he tried. A Sunday dinner at her mother's house where Hollis nervously complimented the mac and cheese 17 times and her cousins mercilessly grilled him about his intentions. He passed their test. Barely. What Hollis loved most was how Adira challenged him. She didn't soften her edges or code switch to make him comfortable. When they talked about race, she didn't let him off easy with his good intentions. When they discussed class, she reminded him that poverty wasn't a character flaw and wealth wasn't a virtue. She made him think. She made him better. What Adira loved was how he saw her. Not as a project or an exotic adventure, but as an equal. He brought her flowers for no reason, left notes in her car, listened when she talked about her dreams of expanding her business, of creating generational wealth for her family the way her grandfather had. He never once made her feel like she needed saving. The proposal came on a December evening when the first snow of the season dusted Atlanta's skyline, a rare and magical thing. They stood on a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city they'd explored together, two worlds meeting in the space between heartbeats. When Hollis dropped to one knee, Adira's breath caught. Not because of the ring, though it was beautiful, but because of the look in his eyes. Pure, certain, real. Yes, she whispered. And in that moment, she believed love could bridge any divide. But then Hollis said the words that would change everything. I want you to meet my family. Let's have an engagement party at the estate. Adira's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. She knew this was coming. The real test. The moment when she'd step out of their private bubble and into his world. A world that had never been designed to welcome someone like her. Okay, she agreed, pushing down the flutter of anxiety in her chest. Let's do it. What she didn't know was that in 3 weeks, she'd be standing in a Buckhead mansion, surrounded by people who'd look at her and see everything she wasn't, while missing everything she was. What she didn't know was that the man she loved would have to choose between the family that raised him and the woman who saw him truly. And what neither of them knew was that Adira held a secret that would expose them all. But first, she'd have to survive their cruelty. The question was, would their love survive it too? The Greenberg estate didn't just sit in Buckhead, it commanded it. As Adira's car wound up the private drive that evening, past manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than most people's mortgages, she felt her stomach tighten into a knot she couldn't name. Was it excitement, anxiety, or something darker, the primal instinct that warns you when you're walking into a trap? She'd chosen her dress carefully, not too flashy, not too modest. A deep emerald that complemented her skin and spoke of elegance without apology. Her mother had helped with her hair that afternoon, twisting it into an updo that honored her natural texture while looking polished enough for whatever scrutiny awaited. As she applied her lipstick in the car mirror, her mother's words echoed, "Baby, you walk in there with your head high. You're a Mason. We don't bow to nobody." But when Hollis opened her car door, his face bright with pride and nervousness, Adira wondered if her mother had ever stood at gates like these. If her mother had ever loved someone from a world so foreign it might as well have been another planet. The mansion's double doors opened to reveal a scene from a movie Adira had never auditioned for. Crystal chandeliers that fractured light into 1,000 diamonds. Women in designer gowns that cost more than Adira's car. Men in tuxedos discussing mergers and acquisitions over glasses of champagne that probably had names she couldn't pronounce. And everywhere, white faces turning toward her with expressions that ranged from polite curiosity to something that made her skin prickle. Hollis's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "Ready?" he whispered. She wasn't, but she smiled anyway. "Let's do this." What Adira couldn't have known was that every person in that room had already formed an opinion about her. Not based on who she was, but on what she represented, a disruption to their carefully ordered world. A question mark where there should have been a period. The attacks came wrapped in compliments, delivered with smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Aunt Marissa descended first. A woman in her 70s with pearls that looked like they'd been passed down through generations of disapproval. She took Adira's hands in hers, holding them like specimens under glass. "Oh, how exotic! And you're so articulate." The word articulate hung in the air like a slur dressed in Sunday clothes. Adira had heard it before, knew exactly what it meant. "We expected you to sound less educated, less refined, less than." "Thank you," Adira replied, her voice steady. "I'm a CPA, so I hope I'm articulate." The joke landed flat. Aunt Marissa blinked, confused that Adira had implied anything problematic about her comment, then moved on to air-kiss Hollis's cheek. Cousin James was next, a man in his 30s with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. "So where did you two meet?" "One of Hollis's charity projects." He laughed at his own joke. Several others joined in. Adira felt Hollis stiffen beside her, but he said nothing. Just a tight smile that begged the question. Was he embarrassed of his family or of her? We met at Sweet Auburn Springfest, Adira answered, her chin lifted. I was volunteering. Hollis was learning about the parts of Atlanta his family pretends don't exist. The sharpness in her voice cut through the laughter. James's smile faltered. Good, Adira thought. Let them know she had teeth. But the evening was young, and the cuts kept coming. Each one small enough to dismiss individually but together forming a pattern as clear as a constellation. A woman complimented her hair, then asked if she could touch it. Reaching out before Adira could answer, fingers probing like Adira was an exhibit at a zoo. Someone else asked where she really came from. Unsatisfied when Adira said Atlanta, pushing until Adira had to explain her family's entire genealogy to prove her Americanness. Another guest mentioned how athletic she looked, eyes scanning her body in a way that made Adira want to shower. And then there was Vivian Greenberg, Hollis's mother. She appeared like a ghost in expensive fabric, her face a masterclass in controlled displeasure. When Hollis introduced them, Vivian's handshake was cold, brief, clinical. Adira, Vivian repeated, as if testing the name's weight. How unusual. African. My grandmother chose it, Adira replied. It means strong in Hebrew, actually. Vivian's eyebrow arched. Surprised that Adira knew such things, perhaps. Or irritation that she'd been corrected. How interesting. Hollis tells me you're in accounting. The pause before accounting suggested Vivian had expected something less professional. Maybe waitressing. Maybe nothing at all. I own my own firm, Adira clarified. Small business, but growing. How ambitious. Vivian's smile was the kind wolves give sheep. I do admire career girls, though I've always wondered how they balance it all, especially when there are other considerations. Her eyes dropped meaningfully to Adira's ring finger, to the engagement ring that suddenly felt heavy as an anchor. Hollis jumped in, trying to redirect the conversation, but Adira had already decoded the message. You're not good enough for my son. You'll never be good enough, and I'll make sure you know it. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have housed Adira's entire apartment. She found herself seated between Hollis and a cousin she hadn't met, Rebecca, a blonde woman who'd clearly started drinking before arriving. As servers brought course after course of food Adira couldn't identify, the conversation flowed around her like a river around a stone. Talk of vacation homes in Aspen, investment portfolios, country club drama. A language Adira didn't speak, discussing a world she'd never inhabited. She caught Hollis's eye across the table several times. He smiled encouragingly, but there was something pleading in his expression. Just get through tonight, it said. It'll get better. Would it, though? That was the question gnawing at Adira's confidence. Could it get better when every person at this table looked at her and saw an outsider? When even Hollis seemed more focused on managing his family's reactions than defending her dignity? Rebecca leaned toward her, champagne sloshing in her glass. So, Adira, she slurred, loud enough that conversations around them paused. How does it feel? Landing the big fish. She giggled, pleased with her metaphor. I'm sorry. Adira kept her voice level, though her heart had started to race. Oh, come on. We're all adults here. Rebecca gestured around the table with her glass. $5 billion is a lot of fish. I mean, good for you, honestly. If I weren't family, I'd probably try to bag him myself. More giggles. A few uncomfortable laughs from others at the table. The words hit Adira like a slap. $5 billion. She hadn't known the exact number, had never asked, never cared. But now it hung in the air, an accusation masquerading as a compliment. Rebecca. Hollis's voice was sharp, warning. But Rebecca wasn't done. The alcohol had loosened whatever filter she possessed. What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Pretty girl from the hood bags a billionaire? It's like a Hallmark movie, except, more urban. She said, urban the way someone might say disease. The table had gone silent. Every eye on Adira, waiting to see how the gold digger would respond to being called out. Adira's hands trembled in her lap. She wanted to stand up, to walk out, to tell every single person at this table exactly what she thought of them. But she'd been raised better than that. Raised to keep her composure even when people treated her like trash. Raised to be twice as good to get half as far. "I love Hollis," she said quietly, each word carefully chosen. "His bank account has nothing to do with it." "Of course it doesn't," Vivian interjected smoothly, her tone suggesting the exact opposite. "I'm sure you and Hollis have a very genuine connection. Rebecca's just had too much wine. Haven't you, dear?" The rebuke was gentle, more for show than substance. Hollis finally spoke up, his voice tight with anger. "Adira is not a gold digger. That's offensive and completely out of line. But the damage was done." Adira could feel it in the way people's eyes slid away from hers. In the whispers that would start the moment she left the room. In the validation Rebecca's accusation had given to everyone's unspoken assumptions. Of course the black girl was after the money. What else could it be? Adira excused herself, mumbling something about the restroom. She made it to the powder room before the tears came, hot and furious. She stared at herself in the gilded mirror, at the face her mother said was beautiful, at the dress she'd so carefully chosen, at the woman who was supposed to be celebrating her engagement but instead felt like she'd been put on trial and found guilty. How had it come to this? And more importantly, why had Hollis's defense felt so weak, so late, so insufficient? The drive back to Adira's apartment was suffocating with silence. Hollis kept trying to start conversations that Adira shut down with one-word answers. She stared out the window, watching Buckhead give way to Midtown, then to her own neighborhood, where corner stores had bars on the windows and people sat on porches despite the winter cold. Two different Atlantas, two different worlds, and she was stuck between them, belonging to neither. "Adira, please," Hollis finally said, pulling up to her building. "Talk to me. What do you want me to say?" Her voice was flat, exhausted. "I know tonight was rough. Rebecca was out of line." "Rebecca?" Adira turned to face him, and something in her expression made him flinch. "Rebecca was just saying what everyone was thinking, Hollis. Your entire family thinks I'm a gold digger. They think I'm some kind of con artist who seduced you for your money. That's not true. Then why didn't you defend me?" The question hung between them like a guillotine blade. When she said those things, when they all looked at me like I was some kind of scam artist, where were you? Hollis's jaw worked. "I did defend you. I told Rebecca she was out of line. After how long? After how many people heard her call me a gold digger? After your mother basically agreed with her." Adira's voice cracked. "You know what the worst part is? I saw it in your face too. That split second of doubt. Like maybe you wondered if they were right." "Adira, no. I need to go." She reached for the door handle. "Wait." Hollis grabbed her hand. "I love you. You have to know that. Tonight was... My family needs time. They'll come around." "And if they don't?" Adira asked. "What then, Hollis? You gonna choose me over $5 billion? Over your family legacy? Over everything you've ever known?" He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. And in that silence, Adira found her answer. She got out of the car, walked into her building, and let herself cry the kind of tears that come from a wound that goes deeper than skin. Because love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. Love wasn't supposed to make you question your worth. And love definitely wasn't supposed to come with a family that treated you like an intruder in a space you'd been invited into. The next morning, Adira woke to 17 missed calls from Hollis and a text from her best friend Shanice. "Girl, we need to talk. Coffee in 20? At the cafe?" Shanice took one look at Adira's face and knew. That bad? Adira told her everything. The microaggressions, the gold digger comment, Hollis's weak defense. And as she spoke, she saw her own doubts reflected in Shanice's expression. "I'm gonna say something you might not want to hear," Shanice said carefully. "But I love you too much not to. These people, they're never gonna accept you. Not really. You could be Michelle Obama and they'd still find something wrong because you're black and you're beneath them." She made air quotes, anger flashing in her eyes. The question is Hollis worth that? It was the question Adira had been avoiding. Because loving Hollis was easy. Being with Hollis, just the two of them, was effortless. But marriage wasn't just about two people. It was about families merging, histories colliding, futures intertwining. And Hollis's family wasn't just resistant. They were hostile. "I don't know," Adira admitted. "I love him, but I don't know if I can do this for the rest of my life." Over the next weeks, things got worse. Hollis insisted she move in with him, a gesture that felt more like an attempt to control the narrative than genuine desire. His family scheduled more get-to-know-you dinners that were actually interrogations in disguise. At one particularly brutal lunch, Edward Greenberg, Hollis's father, dropped the prenup bomb. "We just hope you understand the lifestyle you're marrying into," Edward said, his tone suggesting he was doing her a favor by explaining. "It comes with responsibilities, expectations, and yes, financial considerations." He slid a document across the table. "Our lawyers have drafted something fair." Adira picked up the prenup, scanned it, and felt her stomach drop. If the marriage ended, she'd get nothing. Not $1 from the Greenberg fortune, not a share of assets acquired during the marriage, nothing. The message was clear: we don't trust you. We never will. "This isn't a prenup," Adira said quietly. "This is an insult." Vivian jumped in, her voice dripping false sweetness. "Darling, it's just standard procedure. Surely you understand. Hollis's inheritance is substantial, and we have to protect." "Protect against what?" Adira interrupted. "Against me? Against the possibility that I might actually contribute to this marriage and deserve to be treated as an equal partner." "Don't be dramatic," Edward said dismissively. "If you truly love Hollis, his money shouldn't matter anyway." The hypocrisy was stunning. If money didn't matter, why the prenup? If she wasn't after his wealth, why treat her like she was? They wanted it both ways, to accuse her of being a gold digger while simultaneously confirming that's exactly how they saw her. Hollis, to his credit, argued against the prenup. But even his protests felt performative, like he was going through motions he knew would end with him caving to his family. And maybe that's what hurt most. Not the prenup itself, but Hollis's inability to truly stand against his family's cruelty. Meanwhile, drama was unfolding at Greenberg Investments. A $5 billion merger with a tech conglomerate was on the table, the kind of deal that would cement the family's legacy for generations. Hollis was supposed to be leading the negotiations, but he was distracted, scattered, obviously torn between business and his crumbling personal life. At a family business dinner, which Adira was obligated to attend, Vivian made a comment that revealed just how transactional they viewed her presence. "You know, Adira, your connections in the black business community could be quite valuable. We're looking to diversify our portfolio, and having someone with your perspective could open doors." The tokenization was breathtaking. They didn't want Adira for who she was. They wanted her as a key to unlock markets they couldn't access on their own. She was a tool, a means to an end, a diversity checkbox that came with the bonus of access to communities they'd historically excluded. "My connections aren't for sale," Adira said, her voice ice. Edward chuckled. "Everyone's connections are for sale, dear. That's how business works." And there it was, the fundamental difference between Adira's world and theirs. In her community, relationships were sacred, built on trust and mutual support. In their world, everything had a price tag, including people. Hollis saw the look on Adira's face and tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. That night, when they were alone, Adira told him she wanted to postpone the wedding. "Just slow down," she said, her voice breaking. "I need time to think." "Think about what?" Hollis's desperation was palpable. "About us. About whether I can marry into a family that sees me as either a con artist or a business opportunity. About whether you're strong enough to stand up to them. About whether I'm willing to sacrifice my dignity for love." The postponement threat did something to Hollis. Something shifted. For the first time, he seemed to truly see what Adira had been experiencing. Not through the filter of his privilege or his family's justifications, but in its raw, painful reality. He showed up at Adira's apartment at midnight, eyes red from crying. "I've been an idiot," he said without preamble. "I've been asking you to endure my family's cruelty while doing nothing to actually change anything. I've been hiding behind 'they'll come around' and 'give it time' because facing them head-on scared me. But you know what scares me more? Losing you." Adira let him in, her heart torn between hope and self-preservation. "I'm going to tell them," Hollis continued. "Tomorrow. I'm going to tell them that if they can't treat you with respect, if they can't see you as the brilliant, strong, incredible woman you are, then I'm walking away. From the business. From the inheritance. From all of it." "Hollis." "I mean it, Adira. I choose you. I should have chosen you from the beginning." It was what Adira wanted to hear. But words were easy. Action was what mattered. "I need to see it," she told him. "Not just hear it. I need to see you stand up to them." "You will," he promised. The next day, Hollis called a family meeting. Adira wasn't there. He insisted on doing this alone, on proving he could fight for her without her having to defend herself. He walked into his father's study where the whole family had gathered, and he laid it out plain. "I'm marrying Adira, and if any of you can't accept that, if any of you can't treat her with the respect she deserves, then you won't be part of our lives. It's that simple." The response was immediate and brutal. Edward laughed, actually laughed, at his son's ultimatum. "You won't last a month without family money. Boy, you've never worked a real day in your life. Never struggled for anything. You think you'll just walk away from billions of dollars for some girl you've known less than a year? She's not some girl. She's the woman I love." Vivian tried a different approach, guilt. "We raised you, gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? By choosing an outsider over your own blood." "You made her an outsider," Hollis shot back. "You treated her like garbage from the moment you met her. Called her a gold digger, questioned her worth, tokenized her connections. You didn't give her a chance." Aunt Marissa chimed in. "We're just trying to protect you, dear." "From what? From happiness? From love? Or from someone who doesn't look like you?" The accusation of racism hung in the air. No one acknowledged it directly, but it poisoned the room like gas. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? All the classism, all the suspicion, all the cruelty. It was rooted in the fundamental belief that Adira, as a black woman, couldn't possibly be Hollis's equal. The meeting ended with threats on both sides. Edward promised to cut Hollis off completely. Hollis promised to walk away and never look back. It was a standoff with no winners, only casualties. But the Greenbergs weren't used to losing. They escalated. First came the whisper campaign. Suddenly, Atlanta's high society was buzzing with rumors about Hollis's unsuitable fiancé. Adira started getting cold shoulders at places she'd been welcomed before. A business networking event she'd been invited to was suddenly full. A potential client canceled a meeting, citing scheduling conflicts that felt more like social pressure. Then came the intervention. Hollis's extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, descended on him like locusts, each with their own version of "we're concerned," each suggesting that maybe he was moving too fast, making rash decisions, letting infatuation cloud his judgment. The subtext was always the same. She's not one of us. Choose family. Choose money. Choose the familiar. The pressure was immense. Hollis started missing sleep, losing weight. The stress etched into every line of his face. Adira watched the man she loved being torn apart by forces he'd never had to fight before, and she felt helpless. Was this what their life would be? Constantly battling his family? Constantly having to prove their love's legitimacy? And then Edward played his dirtiest card. A lawyer showed up at Adira's office with an envelope. Inside was a check for $2 million. The note attached was brief. "For services rendered. We trust this will help you move on." Adira stared at the check, hands trembling with rage. They were trying to buy her off. Trying to prove that she was exactly what they'd accused her of being. Someone who could be purchased, whose love had a price. She called Hollis immediately. "Your father just tried to pay me to leave you." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, how much? Does it matter? No. God, no. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Adira. I'll talk to him. I don't want you to talk to him. I want you to understand something. This is who they are. This is who they'll always be. And I need to know, can you live with that? Can you really walk away from them? The question hung between them, because walking away sounded noble in theory, but the reality was messier. Hollis would lose his inheritance, his business connections, his family legacy. He'd be starting from scratch at 30 years old with no safety net, no guarantee of success. It was easy to say you'd give up everything for love. Harder to actually do it. Yes, Hollis said finally. I can. I will. But Adira was no longer sure believing was enough. That night, Adira sat in her apartment surrounded by the evidence of two different lives. On one side, family photos, her business records, her grandmother's Bible. The life she'd built through hard work and determination. On the other, engagement party photos, texts from Hollis, the diamond ring that caught light and threw rainbows. She thought about her grandfather, the man she'd never really known but whose legacy lived in her bank account. He'd faced discrimination too. Built his fortune despite people telling him he couldn't, shouldn't, didn't deserve to. He'd fought and won. But at what cost? Her mother rarely spoke of him. The estrangement a wound that never fully healed. Was that Adira's future? Fighting for acceptance that might never come? Teaching her future children to armor themselves against family who should love them unconditionally? Spending holidays navigating hostility? Growing old explaining to Hollis's relatives that yes, she belonged, yes, she deserved respect, yes, she was enough? The inheritance documents sat in her safe. $15 million that could change everything. Not just for her, but for how Hollis's family saw her. If they knew she had money, would they back off? Or would it just confirm their worst suspicions? More importantly, did she want their acceptance if it came with a price tag? If they could only respect her when they knew her net worth? Adira had always believed in honesty, in transparency, but she'd kept this secret because she wanted Hollis to love her for herself, not her bank account. Now, that decision felt both righteous and foolish. Righteous because it proved Hollis's love was real. Foolish because maybe knowing about her wealth could have prevented months of humiliation. She made a decision. She would tell them. Not to gain their approval, but to expose their hypocrisy. To prove that their assumptions about her worth, her intentions, her character were built on nothing but prejudice. But first, there was one more dinner to endure. Vivian arranged it as a peace offering. An intimate family dinner to clear the air before the wedding planning continued. Adira knew it was a trap. She went anyway, the inheritance documents tucked in her purse like a loaded gun. The Greenberg dining room was as imposing as ever, but this time Adira walked in differently. Not with the hopeful nervousness of someone seeking acceptance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she held all the cards. The entire extended family was there. Vivian and Edward at the table's head. Aunt Marissa, Cousin Rebecca, Cousin James. Others Adira had met at various functions, all wearing expressions of polite hostility. Hollis sat beside her, his jaw tight, clearly dreading whatever fresh hell his family had planned. "We're so glad you could join us, Adira," Vivian began, her smile sharp as broken glass. "We thought it important to discuss some practical matters before moving forward." Edward slid the prenup across the table, a new version somehow even more insulting than the first. "We've had our lawyers revise this. We think you'll find it more than fair." Adira glanced at it. It wasn't more fair. If anything, it was worse. Clauses about behavior expectations, requirements for how she'd represent the family, stipulations about social engagements she'd be required to attend. It read less like a prenuptial agreement and more like a contract of servitude. "We just want to make sure we're all on the same page," Vivian continued. "That we understand each other's expectations. You understand that marrying into this family comes with certain responsibilities, certain standards." Rebecca, emboldened by wine again, leaned forward. "What Mother's trying to say is we need to know you're serious. That this isn't just about the money." "The money," Adira repeated slowly. Well, yes. Rebecca gestured around the room. Let's not pretend that's not a factor. Hollis is worth billions. You're what, an accountant? The math isn't complicated. Hollis started to object, but Adira put a hand on his arm. Let her finish. I'm just saying what we're all thinking, Rebecca continued, alcohol loosening her tongue. You came from nothing. Hollis came from everything. Obviously there's an imbalance. An imbalance, Adira echoed. Edward jumped in, his tone patronizing. What Rebecca means is that we want to ensure this marriage is built on genuine affection, not financial opportunity. If you truly love Hollis, signing this prenup should be no problem. Unless, of course, there are other motivations at play. The accusation was clear. They were calling her a gold digger to her face, daring her to deny it, to defend herself, to prove she was worthy of their son. Adira looked around the table at these people who had judged her from the moment they met her, who had questioned her intelligence, her intentions, her very humanity, who had tried to humiliate her into submission, to break her down until she either left or became whatever compliant version of herself they could tolerate. And she smiled. You want to talk about money? Adira said, her voice calm. Okay, let's talk about money. She reached into her purse and pulled out the documents, laid them on the table with deliberate care. Every eye in the room locked onto the papers, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. What is this? Vivian asked, confusion flickering across her carefully composed face. This, Adira said, is the truth you were too prejudiced to imagine. And in that moment, as she prepared to reveal the secret she'd kept for months, Adira realized something. This wasn't about proving her worth to them. It was about exposing who they really were. And once that truth was out, there would be no going back. For any of them. The documents sat on the Greenberg family's dining table like evidence at a trial. And in a way, that's exactly what they were, proof of a crime. Not Adira's crime, but theirs. The crime of assumption. The crime of prejudice. The crime of measuring a woman's worth by the color of her skin and the perceived weight of her wallet. Vivian reached for the papers first, her manicured fingers trembling slightly. As her eyes scanned the legal text, her face underwent a transformation. Confusion melting into shock, shock hardening into something that looked dangerously close to fear. She passed the documents to Edward without a word. He read. His jaw went slack. What is it? Rebecca demanded, leaning forward. What are those? Adira let the silence stretch. Let them squirm. Let them wonder. Because for months, they'd made her wait for acceptance, wait for respect, wait for basic human decency. Now it was their turn to wait. Finally, she spoke. Those documents prove that I am the sole beneficiary of the Mason family trust. My grandfather, a black man who built a real estate empire in Atlanta when your country clubs wouldn't even let him through the front door, left me $15 million, plus significant property holdings throughout the city. She paused, watching the blood drain from Rebecca's face. So when you called me a gold digger, when you questioned whether I loved Hollis for him or his money, when you offered me $2 million to disappear, you weren't just being cruel. You were being stupid. The word stupid landed like a slap. No one in this room was used to being called stupid. They were the educated elite, the ones who'd gone to the best schools, made the smartest investments, built empires. But in this moment, with Adira standing before them holding proof of their own bigotry, they looked exactly like what they were. People who'd let prejudice make fools of them. Aunt Marissa found her voice first. 15 million? But you work as an accountant. You live in that small apartment. You drive a normal car? Wear normal clothes? Live like a normal person? Adira finished for her. Yes, because unlike you, I don't need to broadcast my wealth to feel valuable. I built a life I'm proud of through my own work. The inheritance was just there, waiting. I never touched it because I didn't need it. I had everything that mattered. Family who loved me. Work that fulfilled me. A community that respected me. She turned to Hollis, whose eyes were brimming with tears. Pride, shame, love, regret. All of it written across his face in equal measure. I didn't tell you about the money because I wanted you to love me. Just me. Not my bank account, not my assets, not what I could offer you financially. I wanted what you claimed to want. Genuine affection, real partnership, love that transcended material things. Her voice softened. And you gave me that, Hollis. You really did. But your family. She turned back to the assembled Greenbergs, and her voice hardened again. Your family spent months making me feel like I was beneath you, like I was some kind of opportunist who'd tricked your son into loving me. You questioned my intelligence, my character, my intentions. You made jokes about my ghetto origins. You tried to buy me off like I was merchandise that could be returned with a receipt. And through it all, not one of you considered that maybe, just maybe, your assumptions were wrong. That maybe I didn't need your money. That maybe I was exactly who I appeared to be. A woman who fell in love with a man, regardless of his bank account. Edward cleared his throat, attempting to regain some authority. Now, Adira, let's not be hasty. If we'd known. If you'd known what? Adira interrupted. You would have treated me with respect? You would have welcomed me into your family? Don't you see how that proves my point? The only thing that's changed in the last 5 minutes is your knowledge of my net worth. I'm the same person I was when I walked in here. The same person you've been insulting for months. But now that you know I have money, suddenly you're ready to reconsider. The silence that followed was damning. Because she was right and they all knew it. But would the truth be enough to change them? Or would they simply find new ways to justify their prejudice? Hollis stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Every eye turned to him. This was it, the moment Adira had been waiting for. The moment that would define not just their relationship, but who Hollis truly was beneath the privilege and the family name. I'm done, he said quietly. Vivian blinked. Hollis, darling. I'm done, he repeated louder this time. Done with your judgment. Done with your cruelty. Done pretending that any of this is acceptable. He picked up the prenup and tore it in half. The sound was sharp, final. Adira has spent months being degraded by this family. She's endured your microaggressions, your accusations, your attempts to humiliate her into leaving. And she did it with more grace than any of you deserve. He turned to Adira, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Absolute clarity. You were right to question whether I was strong enough to stand up to them. Because I wasn't. I kept telling myself they'd come around, that time would fix things, that I could have both you and my family. But that was cowardice. I was asking you to endure abuse while I waited for a miracle that was never coming. Hollis, that's not fair, Edward began. Isn't it? Hollis spun on his father. You tried to pay her to leave me. $2 million. Like she was a problem you could solve with a checkbook. What kind of man does that to his son? What kind of family does that to someone their child loves? Edward's face reddened. We were protecting you. From what? From happiness? From love? Or from having a black woman in the family? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Let's call it what it is, Dad. This has always been about race. Not money, not class, race. You looked at Adira and saw someone who didn't belong because she doesn't look like us. Everything else, the gold digger accusations, the concerns about her background, that was just dressing up racism in acceptable language. Now wait just a minute, Aunt Marissa started. No. Hollis's voice was steel. You wait. You all wait and listen, because I'm only going to say this once. Adira is the best thing that ever happened to me. She's intelligent, compassionate, strong, and more honest than anyone in this room. She could have told us about her inheritance months ago, could have used it to buy your approval, but she didn't because she has integrity. Something this family seems to have forgotten the meaning of. He walked around the table to stand beside Adira, taking her hand. The gesture was simple but profound, a public choosing of sides. I'm walking away from the family business, from my inheritance, from all of this. He gestured around the opulent dining room. I don't need your money. I have my education, my skills, and most importantly, I have Adira. We'll build our own life on our own terms, with people who actually value character over bank accounts and skin color. Vivian stood up, her composure finally cracking. You don't mean that. You're angry, I understand, but you're not thinking clearly. You've never lived without money, Hollis. Never struggled. Never. Then I'll learn, Hollis said simply. Better to struggle with someone who loves me than live in luxury with people who only care about preserving their prejudices. Edward slammed his hand on the table. You won't last 6 months. You'll come crawling back, and when you do— I won't, Hollis interrupted. Because unlike you, I understand that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in love, in integrity, in standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything. And Adira has taught me that. He looked at Adira then, really looked at her, and she saw the man she'd fallen in love with. Not the heir to billions, not the privileged son of Atlanta's elite, but simply Hollis. Flawed, finally awakened and choosing her. Let's go, he said softly. But Adira wasn't quite finished. She had one more thing to say. Before we leave, Adira said, her voice calm but carrying power, I want to make something clear. I'm not telling you about my inheritance to gain your approval. I'm telling you to hold up a mirror, to show you what your prejudice looks like when the facts don't match your assumptions. She looked directly at Vivian. You assumed I was poor because I'm black. You assumed I was uneducated because I didn't go to your schools. You assumed I was after Hollis's money because you couldn't imagine a world where I didn't need it. Every assumption was rooted in the belief that someone like me couldn't possibly be someone like you. To Edward, you thought you could buy me off because you've always been able to buy your way out of uncomfortable situations. But some things can't be purchased. Dignity, self-respect, love. I have all three, and none of them were for sale at any price. To Rebecca, you called me a gold digger because it was easier than examining your own insecurities. Easier to tear me down than to build yourself up. But here's the truth. I never wanted to take anything from this family. I only wanted to be part of it because I loved Hollis. You're the ones who made that impossible. She took a breath, and her voice softened slightly. Not with affection, but with something that might have been pity. I feel sorry for you, all of you, because you live in a world so small, so constrained by your own biases, that you can't see people for who they actually are. You missed the chance to know me, the real me, because you were too busy defending against a threat that never existed. And now you've lost your son because you valued your prejudices more than his happiness. Adira picked up her purse, tucked the documents back inside. Hollis and I are getting married. Not in this house, not with your blessing, and not under your terms. We'll marry in my community, surrounded by people who've loved and accepted both of us from the beginning. You're welcome to attend if you can manage basic human decency. But if you come as guests, not as judges. And if you can't do that, stay away. She turned to leave, Hollis's hand firmly in hers. But at the doorway she paused, looked back one more time. I hope you learn from this. I hope you look at other people, people who don't look like you, who don't have your money, who don't fit your narrow definition of acceptable, and you pause before judging them. Because the next time you assume someone's worth based on appearances, you might be wrong. And it might cost you something you can't buy back. And with that, they walked out. Out of the mansion, out of Buckhead, out of the world that had never wanted Adira but would now have to reckon with the cost of its rejection. Behind them, the Greenberg family sat in silence, forced to confront a question they'd never had to ask before. What if we're the ones who aren't good enough? The days following the revelation were strange. Hollis moved his things out of his apartment, family-owned, naturally, and into Adira's modest space. It was cramped with both of their belongings, their lives literally colliding in a one-bedroom apartment that had never been designed for two. But there was something beautiful in the chaos, something honest. Hollis started job hunting. Without his family connections, it was harder than he'd expected. His resume was impressive on paper, but so many doors in Atlanta's business world were connected to his family, and word had spread about his falling out with the Greenbergs. Some former colleagues wouldn't return his calls. Others offered sympathy but no actual opportunities. Maybe this was a mistake, Hollis said one night, staring at his laptop screen filled with rejection emails. Adira looked up from her own work. Having second thoughts? No, he said quickly. Then, more honestly, Maybe not about you, never about you, but about all of this. I knew it would be hard, but I didn't realize how hard. I've never not had a safety net before. Welcome to how most people live, Adira said gently. It's scary, but it's also real. She moved to sit beside him. You know what's different between you and me? I grew up knowing that I'd have to work twice as hard for half as much. That every opportunity would be a fight. That safety nets were a luxury I couldn't afford. It made me strong. And now you're building that same strength. It hurts, but it's worth it. Hollis leaned into her. I don't regret choosing you. Good, because I don't regret letting you. But while they were building their new life together, something unexpected was happening at the Greenberg estate. Vivian Greenberg sat in her parlor, the same room where she'd hosted hundreds of society events, and felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Shame. The story had gotten out, of course. In circles like theirs, secrets were currency, and this particular secret was too juicy to keep contained. Adira Mason, the woman they'd dismissed as a gold digger, had her own fortune. The Greenbergs had humiliated themselves, revealed their prejudices, and lost their son in the process. The social fallout was swift. At her book club, Vivian noticed the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. At a charity luncheon, an old friend, emboldened by wine, asked point-blank, "Is it true you tried to pay off Hollis's fiancé?" The question stung because the answer was yes. Edward had tried, and by extension they all had. They'd treated Adira as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. Aunt Marissa was the first to crack. She showed up at the estate unannounced, her usual confidence replaced with something that looked like genuine remorse. "I've been thinking," she told Vivian over tea, "about what Adira said, about our assumptions." "Don't," Vivian warned. "Don't make this into some grand moral lesson." "But it is, isn't it?" Marissa stirred her tea with deliberate slowness. "We were wrong, Vivian. Not just wrong about her financial situation. Wrong about her character, her worth, her intentions. We were cruel to that girl because we couldn't imagine a world where she belonged with us. And that says more about our limitations than hers." Vivian wanted to argue, wanted to defend their actions with justifications about protecting family, about being cautious, about Hollis's future. But in the quiet of her parlor, with only her sister-in-law as witness, she couldn't muster the energy for lies. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. "We apologize," Marissa said, "genuinely, and we change." But could they? Could people who'd spent their entire lives in bubbles of privilege and prejudice really change? Or was transformation something reserved for younger generations, for people like Hollis who still had the flexibility to bend without breaking? Edward struggled more than Vivian. He was a man who'd built his identity on being right, on making smart decisions, on reading people accurately. Adira's revelation had shattered that self-image. He'd misread the situation completely, let his biases cloud his judgment, and potentially destroyed his relationship with his son in the process. Late one night, after several drinks, he called Hollis. The conversation was brief, tense. "I'm not calling to apologize," Edward said, because he couldn't quite bring himself to that level of vulnerability. "I'm calling to understand what you saw in her that we missed." Hollis's laugh was bitter. "Dad, you missed everything. Her kindness, her intelligence, her strength. You were so busy looking for ulterior motives that you couldn't see the obvious truth. She's an incredible person who happened to fall in love with me. I thought we were protecting you. From what? From someone who makes me better? From someone who challenges me to be more than just the heir to a fortune." Hollis paused. "You taught me that family comes first. But you never taught me that family has to earn that loyalty through respect and love, not just blood." The call ended without resolution, but it planted a seed. The question of whether the Greenbergs could change remained open, sprouting in the dark soil of their regret. 3 months later, Adira and Hollis stood in the New Birth Baptist Church, surrounded by people who'd loved them from the beginning. The sanctuary was nothing like the Buckhead estate. No crystal chandeliers, no ice sculptures, no champagne towers. Instead, there were flowers from the community garden, programs printed at the local print shop, and a gospel choir that made the very walls tremble with joy. Adira wore a dress her mother had helped her choose, elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but affordable. Hollis wore a suit he'd bought with his first paycheck from his new job at a small investment firm that specialized in ethical investing. They were building a new life brick by brick, choice by choice. The church was packed. Adira's family filled the pews, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends who'd watched her grow up, neighbors who'd known her since childhood, the kids from her mentorship program, dressed in their Sunday best. Shanice stood as her maid of honor, tears already streaming down her face before the ceremony even began. On Hollis's side, the turnout was sparse. A few college friends who'd stayed loyal, a mentor from his undergraduate years, and, surprisingly, some family. Aunt Marissa arrived first, clutching a gift and looking nervous as a first-time church visitor. A few cousins followed, the ones who'd been horrified by the family's treatment of Adira and had reached out to apologize privately. And then, just before the ceremony started, Vivian and Edward Greenberg walked through the church doors. They looked out of place in their expensive formal wear, standing in a church that celebrated a different culture, a different tradition, a different way of being in the world. But they'd come. That had to mean something. The ceremony was everything a wedding should be: joyful, tearful, celebratory. The pastor spoke about love that bridges divides, about choosing partnership over prejudice, about building family through choice as much as blood. When it was time for vows, Hollis spoke first. Adira, I stand before you today not as the man I was, but as the man you've helped me become. You taught me that privilege isn't something to take pride in, it's something to examine, to question, to use for good. You taught me that real strength isn't in the size of your bank account but in the size of your heart. And most importantly, you taught me that love, real love, requires standing up, speaking out, and sometimes walking away from everything you've known to build something better. His voice broke. I'm sorry it took me so long to stand beside you the way you deserved. I'm sorry you had to endure so much cruelty before I found my courage. But I promise you this. For the rest of our lives, I will choose you. Every single day. No matter what it costs me. Adira's vows were equally powerful. Hollis, when we met, I didn't know if love could survive our differences. Our backgrounds, our worlds, the obstacles that seemed insurmountable. But you showed me that love isn't about where you come from. It's about where you're willing to go. You left comfort for uncertainty. You left wealth for love. You chose integrity over inheritance. And in doing so, you proved that we don't just love each other. We're worthy of each other. She looked out at the congregation. Our story isn't a fairy tale. It's messy and complicated and sometimes painful. But it's real. And it's ours. And I'm grateful for every moment, even the hard ones, that brought us here. When they kissed, the church erupted in applause and shouts of joy. The gospel choir launched into a hymn that shook the rafters. And in that moment, surrounded by authentic love and celebration, Adira and Hollis began their marriage not in a world divided, but in a community united. The reception was held in the church's community hall, decorated with simple elegance and filled with soul food that put every Buckhead catered meal to shame. Collard greens, fried chicken, mac and cheese, sweet potato pie, food made with love and served with joy. Vivian and Edward stood near the entrance, clearly uncomfortable but making an effort. Adira watched them from across the room, wondering if they'd come to genuinely make amends or simply to ease their own guilt. It was Adira's mother who approached them first. Adira Mason, the woman who'd raised Adira alone, who'd worked double shifts to keep food on the table, who'd instilled in her daughter the pride and resilience that had carried her through the Greenbergs' cruelty. Mr. and Mrs. Greenberg, Teresa said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. Vivian took her hand hesitantly. Thank you for allowing us to be here. This isn't my church, Teresa said simply. It's God's house. Everyone's welcome here. She paused, then added with pointed gentleness. Even people who need to learn what real family looks like. The message was clear, but not unkind. Edward shifted uncomfortably. Vivian's eyes welled with tears she tried to hide. "We owe your daughter an apology," Vivian said quietly. "We owe both of them apologies. We were wrong. About everything." Teresa studied her for a long moment. "Apologies are words. Nice words, but still just words. What matters is what comes after. How you treat them going forward. Whether you can see my daughter for who she really is. A brilliant, beautiful, strong woman who loves your son with her whole heart. If you can do that, there's hope. If you can't." She let the implication hang. Hollis approached then, Adira at his side. The moment was awkward, heavy with everything unsaid and everything that could never be unsaid. Edward spoke first. "Son, we wanted to." He trailed off, struggling with words for perhaps the first time in his life. "We're sorry," Vivian finished for him, "for how we treated Adira, for the assumptions we made, for choosing our prejudices over your happiness." She turned to Adira. "You were right, about all of it. We saw what we expected to see instead of who you actually are. And we nearly destroyed something precious because of our own narrow-mindedness." Adira nodded slowly. "I appreciate you saying that, but I need you to understand, I'm not looking for your approval anymore. I have Hollis's love, my community's support, and my own sense of worth. What I need from you is respect. Not because I have money, not because I proved you wrong, but because I'm a human being who deserves it. Can you do that?" The question hung in the air. Could they? Could people change their deepest prejudices? Or would the Greenbergs forever see Adira as an outsider who happened to have enough money to be tolerated? "We can try," Edward said finally. "That's all I can promise. We can try to do better. To be better." "Then that's a start," Adira said. "It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an opening. Possibility. And sometimes that's all reconciliation requires to begin." A year later, Adira and Hollis stood in the same spot where they'd first met, the sweet Auburn Springfest, alive with music and laughter and the beautiful chaos of Atlanta's diverse communities coming together. They were different people now. Hollis worked at his small firm, building a career based on his own merit. It was harder work than he'd ever done, but more fulfilling than anything his family's company had offered. Adira had expanded her business and, using some of her inheritance, had started a community development fund that provided microloans to Black entrepreneurs. They'd bought a house, not in Buckhead, not in her old neighborhood, but somewhere in between, a place that was theirs. Adira's hand rested on the small swell of her belly. They were expecting their first child, a daughter who would grow up knowing both worlds, bridging divides her parents had fought so hard to cross. "Think she'll have to fight the same battles we did?" Hollis asked, his hand covering Adira's on her stomach. "Probably different ones," Adira said honestly. "The world's changing, but not fast enough. She'll face prejudice, assumptions, people who can't see past her mixed-race identity to who she actually is. But she'll also have something we didn't, parents who've already fought these battles and won, who can teach her how to stand tall, how to demand respect, how to choose love without sacrificing dignity." Vivian and Edward had become regular, if still somewhat awkward, presences in their lives. Sunday dinners rotated between families now, each one a small exercise in bridge building. The Greenbergs still had work to do, still caught themselves making assumptions or saying things that revealed ingrained biases. But they were trying. And slowly, incrementally, they were changing. "You know what I realized?" Hollis said, watching young couples of all races and backgrounds enjoying the festival. "My family thought I was giving up everything for you. My inheritance, my social standing, my comfort. But I didn't give up anything. I traded a life built on privilege and prejudice for one built on love and integrity. That's not a sacrifice. It's an upgrade." Adira laughed, leaning into him. "Took you long enough to figure that out." "I'm a slow learner. Good thing I have an excellent teacher." They stood there as the festival swirled around them. Two people who'd crossed divides that should have been impossible, who'd chosen each other when the world suggested they shouldn't, who'd built a love strong enough to weather prejudice, humiliation, and the weight of generational wealth and generational trauma. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. Fairy tales have easy villains and simple resolutions. Their story was messier, truer, a testament to the reality that love, real love, requires more than just feeling. It requires action, sacrifice, courage. It requires standing up when it's easier to sit down, speaking out when it's easier to stay silent, and choosing integrity even when it costs you everything. So here's my question for you. When was the last time you examined your own assumptions? When did you look at someone who seemed different from you, different race, different class, different background, and pause before judging? Because Adira's story teaches us that the people we dismiss, the ones we underestimate, the ones we assume aren't worthy of our respect might just be the ones we need most. Love bridged the gap for Adira and Hollis. But it took courage, honesty, and a willingness to walk away from everything familiar to build something better. What gaps exist in your own life? Between you and family members? Between you and communities different from yours? Between who you are and who you want to be? I want to hear your stories. Have you ever been judged unfairly because of assumptions about your background? Have you been the one making those assumptions? What did it take to change? Drop your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think, made you feel, made you question your own biases, share it. Because the only way we bridge divides is by talking about them honestly. Hit that like button if you believe love can transcend prejudice. Subscribe if you want more stories that challenge you to be better. And remember, true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in integrity, in love, in the courage to stand up for what's right even when it costs you everything. What will you choose?